All right, guys, every single person needs a whiteboard and their notebook out. We have no school tomorrow or on Monday. On Tuesday, you have a vocab quiz on any of the words 1 through 10. And then you will do a lecture, and Wednesday you have a test, 25 questions in 29 minutes. So the same amount of time as last week. Let's do it. Okay, so this week we're doing global resistance. We're also going through the end of the Cold War too. So it's pretty exciting. We're talking about rebellions. We're really focusing on 1968, which is the year of rebellion, but we'll get to that. All right, so let's talk about rebellions. That should be your heading. And the first ones we're going to focus on are nonviolent. And of course, who's the dude who comes up with nonviolent? Gandhi, yes, okay. He's doing this in India. It's super successful. And then it is going to come here to the United States. When we talk about civil disobedience, and that's what it's called, you need to know it has 3 different components: marches, boycotts, and fast. Okay, fast means like you stop eating. You keep drinking, because if you don't drink water, you'll die in 3 days or something like that. Fasting, you can go like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. So, it is, when we talk about civil disobedience, we're talking about it in 3 different ways: marches, boycotts, and fasting. It is, of course, started by Gandhi. It is going to be perfected by Gandhi. And then it is going to move to the United States. And that is where we're going to pick it up. Okay, in the United States, the civil disobedience movement is going to be championed by Martin Luther King Jr. The civil rights movement is going to start up in the late 50s and really kick up. Sorry, Ren just sent me a funny text.
Can you read it to us?
No, this one is no. We're both struggling with the same kid.
Oh my gosh, which kid?
We're both struggling with the same kid, and we just enjoy each other's misery.
Do you text about us?
No, but he says I have a funny story. He just actually said he has a funny story, so I'll call him later and I'll get my funny story. I deserve a giggle.
Oh my god,
Okay, even though he's in the middle of a test right now? Okay.
He has his earbuds in.
Good for him. Live his life. I should do that. Moving forward. Martin Luther King Jr. is going to lead the civil disobedience movement here in the United States for civil rights. We also have another major leader leading the civil rights movement. It's broken into 2 major factions. Who's the second? Malcolm X, yes, absolutely. So Malcolm X is going to lead a little bit more of a violent one. Not that he's like, let's go kill all the white people. That is not his mantra. They are going to talk about Malcolm X, like that's how he speaks, but that is not his true reason. He believes power needs to meet power, and he is going to orchestrate a more in-your-face system, while MLK is going to do a lot more civil disobedience, keeping it strict with Gandhi. Of course, who does history favor? MLK. However, who is going to move the needle the furthest? Malcolm X moves the needle the furthest, and that is why white people embrace MLK as much as they do, because of Malcolm X. Even though Malcolm X is not this big, scary guy who's just going around killing white people and all that stuff, that's kind of the myth and the lore around him to a degree. He is actually an incredibly powerful, genuine speaker who truly believes in the actions and in the words of the people he surrounds himself with, and does great accomplishment, but it is MLK who gets pushed to the finish line, of course. Now, when we talk about MLK, you need to understand that this is happening post World War II. Why is that significant? The civil rights movement, people in the United States, black people in the United States have been oppressed for a very long time. Why is it after World War II? What happened in World War II with black people? Sophia? Yeah, they had to fight in it. And these black men who are second-class citizens here in the United States are going abroad, specifically to Europe. And when they land in Europe, they're treated like heroes, like equality, even, treated with respect. Then they go, some are even dying in their American uniforms, and then they're coming back to America, and what are they treated like? Second-class citizens, okay? So that frustration of seeing what the world looks like outside the United States, dying in American uniforms, being injured in American uniforms, serving America, and coming back to the United States to be a second-class citizen is going to be the final straw that is going to push Black America to really push for civil rights and this movement. So it is important that you understand it's the sacrifice of Black Americans in World War II, that not being recognized by the U.S. government, and then pushing back for those rights, which will lead to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Now, when we talk about civil rights here in the United States, you need to understand Brown versus Board of Education. Okay? It is about, it's going to ban segregation in schools. That is why we are mixed here in 2022, why we don't have white schools and black schools. It is also important that you understand Plessy versus Ferguson, which is the one that says segregation is legal. Okay, these are the two major court documents that you need to know. Plessy versus Ferguson is saying segregation, as long as it's separate but equal, it's legal. Now, boycotts. Here in the United States, the most effective one is going to be the Montgomery bus boycott. Who started the Montgomery bus boycott? Gaki. Rosa Parks. There you go. But the funny thing is, about a month and a half before then, a 16-year-old girl actually is the first person to refuse, a black woman, to refuse to give up her seat. But my 16-year-old girl had a bit of a mouth on and got herself in trouble and was very aggressive, which, hell yeah, I would be the same way, so don't get me wrong. So she wasn't a very sympathetic thing. So when Rosa Parks, who was inspired by this 16-year-old girl, so your age can make a difference, when she heard this story of a girl in her church who got arrested, she decided when she had the opportunity to give up her seat, she did not. So she was directly inspired by a 16-year-old. Rosa Parks, in case you haven't seen her, she's the cutest little old lady, super sweet, and had a huge tolerance for listening to vitriol from white supremacists, which is why she was the perfect image of black Americans being berated by whites, okay? Because she could take it. Marches. The largest one is going to be the March on Washington. And of course, that's going to be capped by MLK's I Have a Dream speech, right, Olivia? It's very exciting. It's a quintessential moment in history. Keep in mind, that is going to be one of the largest public gatherings in the history of the United States for a while. And then we started doing stupid shit when more people got together, and MLK's speech falls back into history in the rankings. Okay? So, that is for the United States. Those are the things you need to know. Is it successful here in the United States? Yes, to a degree. We have legislation on the books that says you cannot discriminate a person by their sex, their race, and all that stuff, and it was resupported by further amendments. Okay? That's the United States. This is all civil disobedience still. Then you have Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela's in South Africa. You need to know he's fighting against the apartheid. APARTHEID, apartheid. That is a strict racial structuring created by the British. Now, the American Jim Crow system, which is what civil rights was opposing, okay, separation, segregation, lynching, all of the terrible, horrible underbellies of American history, okay, that is terrible and effective. Jim Crow is very effective of hurting the black experience and limiting the black life here in the United States. Apartheid in South Africa, however, is going to be the most perfect racial system in the world for suppression. It's perfect. It's incredibly effective. Now, its perfection is absolutely disgusting. Do not get me wrong. When you hear me call it a perfect racial suppression system, that doesn't make it morally right. It's absolutely atrocious. Just when we talked about Hitler. Hitler was an incredible leader, disgusting human being, yes? When we talk about apartheid, the reason of its genius is it turned small factions of people against each other. So no one was fighting the British. So they would take a minority and put them in power. So the majority of people hate the minority and not the British. So they did this on purpose. They inflicted a structure of anger and hostility amongst South Africans. They divided the South Africans by color, by race, by gender, in every way you could possibly do, in order to keep them infighting amongst themselves so no one would bother the British. And it's incredibly effective, incredibly well implemented, and they're still struggling with the remnants of it today in 2022. Now, spoiler alert, Nelson Mandela is going to overthrow the apartheid. Okay, he will. He won't do it. He won't get elected to president until 1982, I think, but don't quote me on that. But that's in the future. So we have Mandela, who's going to be leading marches, boycotts, fastings. He's going to be thrown in jail for 20-something years, 22 years, I believe. Anyone been to South Africa? If you go to South Africa, you have to go see Nelson Mandela's cell. You have to go see the museum and learn about the apartheid system. It's like all the things you got to do and check the box. Okay? So, those are those two. Now, military challenges to authority. So, we just had our civil disobedience, which is all tied to Gandhi. Okay? Here in the United States, we are following a civil disobedience to a degree. Now we're going to start having military reactions to supremacy or power. Now, last week we started seeing this trend in our content where people are rejecting the West. Yes, people are starting to reject the West and trying to create their new path. This week we're going to start seeing the rejection of the USSR because it's the end of the Cold War, okay? So, let's start in Poland, shall we? So, in Poland, and yes, you do need to know this guy's name. I'm not even going to try. Anyone want to try? Huh?
Lady swap.
Yeah. That's a lot. That's very Polish.
Sounds like coleslaw.
Huh?
I'm sorry, the Germans do it. It's probably Vladislav.
Sure. Sounds good to me. Sounds great. I don't know. I'm in no position to tell you what is right or wrong. Are you gonna have it say for us?
Yes.
Nice. Love technology. Here we go. So you need to know that he is going to be the new leader of the Communist Party or the party in power. He is going to take the first step in removing Poland from Soviet control. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what is the most important Warsaw country to Russia? Poland. Poland understands. Say it, do it nice and loud.
It sounds so weird.
It's not weird, it's Polish. That I was right on the nose. Right on the nose. Okay, so Poland is the most important Warsaw country because it has a ton of natural resources. Remember that map I made you do forever ago and how much you hated it?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Still bitter. Okay. With that being said, this is the first step away. Has Poland declared independence? No. They're just taking their first step away. And the first step away is going to be stopping the Soviet collectivization in Poland. So they're going to take their first step away from the Soviets by stopping collectivization. Okay? However, they're still under Soviet control. Hungary is our next country. Okay? Under Nagy, okay, he is going to declare Hungary independent of Russia. Okay. The problem is, if you declare yourself independent, but that country still has their soldiers in your country, how well is that going to go? So, Nagy announced, we're independent, but it was full of Soviet soldiers. So what do you think the Russians did? They were like, no, you're not, and they just took over. So, Hungary is going to declare itself independent, but the Soviets are going to recapture and say, nope, you're mine. Hungarian independence. Okay? Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have now had two countries. One has taken a step away. One foolishly declared themselves independent when they had soldiers inside, so that was stupid. Okay? Now we're going to have the third major event, which is Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is going to have a rebellion called Prague Spring. And you need to put a box around it because you cannot talk about the end of the Cold War without Prague Spring. Okay? Now, in Prague Spring, Dubeck, that's what it is, Dubeck is going to allow more pro-Western ideas into government, like freedom of speech, end of the press, greater freedoms of travel so they can go other places, and making the system more democratic. I don't need you to know every single thing of that, but it's going to be pro-Western, okay? So, the Prague Springs are rebellions, are people in the streets protesting, demanding more Western rights. Okay? Well, the leader of Czechoslovakia, who was put into place by the Soviets, gives in. How do you think the Soviets feel? They're pissed. Now keep in mind, this is also the third country trying to go westward. So what we're going to see is that the Soviet Union, up at the start, is going to make an example out of them. This is our third country who is trying to do more westward things. And the Russians are tired of dealing with it, so you know what? They're like, hell yeah, we're going to use them as the example. So in Czechoslovakia, the Soviets are going to level an obscene amount of force to suppress this capitalist movement. So say there's 400,000 people in the streets protesting for more democracy. The Soviets are going to come in and kill probably about 100,000 people, and they are just going to overreact to the amount of pressure they put on. Does that make sense? They're going to overcompensate because they want to make an example out of Czechoslovakia. And that's the key. You need to know they are trying to make an example out of Czechoslovakia with their reaction. They don't want other countries to start pushing for this independence. With that being said, we're going to have the Brezhnev Doctrine. Okay? The Brezhnev Doctrine says that anyone who tries implementing implementing anything pro-Western or threaten the Warsaw Pact will be dealt with directly by the Soviets' military. So it is a threat. It's an open threat. Do you think I'll ever be healthy ever again?
I mean, you have a toddler, so
I don't think I'll ever be healthy or happy ever again. Okay, here we go. So, the Brezhnev Doctrine. Okay, our next heading is 1968. Shit gets wild in 1968. This is why people say people protest in 1968. Okay, it is the year of the revolt. So, if you had to guess when something occurred, guess what year it occurred in?
1968.
So, when you hear Prague Spring, it happens in? So, I would write under 1968, Prague Spring happens in 1968. Keep in mind that's going to be one of the biggest rebellions in history. Okay, and it's also going to be put down the hardest. Okay, so you need to know that there are major revolts. Write this down. In Yugoslavia, Ireland, Poland, Brazil, Japan. I'm going to say it again. Major rebellions happening in Yugoslavia, Ireland, Poland, Brazil, Japan. United States you can add to that list too, because we're going to have more Vietnam protests Okay, more people are burning American flags in 1968 than any other year previously or after. Shit gets wild. Okay? Now, the reason, and this is what you need to have down, the reason why is because of college campuses. Hot damn. 1968, we have the peak amount of diverse people. I need to write this down. In college campuses for the first time. In 1954, you have the first woman allowed to go to Harvard. Do you know how many women were allowed to go to Harvard in 1960? 4. 1968, Harvard had 30. Yeah. So, but in community colleges and state colleges, you need to write this down, especially here in the United States, are filled with World War II, are filled with all of these these baby boomers. These are your parents. Maybe not. No, your parents are. No, they're my parents. This is my parents' generation. My parents were. My mom was about to go to college. She was a senior in high school in 68. Okay? So, what we're going to see is we have more diverse people in universities. So we have different perspectives and different people coming together. The best thing about college is that you're dealing with different people from different backgrounds and your ideas and stuff could mix. That is the best. Okay? So, what is happening is that these college campuses are going to begin championing, and you need to know this, women's rights, workers' rights, civil rights. Vietnam. Women's rights, workers' rights, civil rights, and Vietnam. These are the major topics of the day. And in 1968, it explodes. Now, here in the here in France, France is going to have the largest protest in 68 with 1 million people in it. 10 million people are going to be in it. Sorry, 10 million people. The French are going to protest workers' rights with 10 million people on strike. Hot damn, that is shocking. Isn't that cool? This is where you start seeing this whole thing. Anyone here been to France? Raise your other hand for those people who've been to France if you were in France and you saw a protest or a strike. All right, we're about half. Hell yeah, this has been my odds all day. All right, so France has a wonderful tradition since the 60s, specifically 68, is that the French are always protesting. They just love a good strike. What were they striking, Virginia, for you?
I can't remember.
Okay, what do you got?
Mine was some coffee shop. I don't really know what they were protesting, but like they were outside a coffee shop. So.
Oh, that was a very small protest.
Yeah.
Mine was trains. If you're in Paris and you can't use the train system, you're screwed. Now, luckily, it only went on for 4 days, and I was in Paris for 5. But it did make it very hard to get around as a dumb tourist in Paris. So that was a problem. Okay? So, 10 million workers are going to go on strike, and it is going to work. Okay? It is going to work. But this movement starts from colleges. Isn't that cool? For the first time, we're really seeing young people changing history in a big way. Prior to this, it was a bunch of old white men making all the decisions for everyone else, and now we start having college kids making difference and impact. So here in the United States, you need to write this down. We are going to have women's rights in Vietnam and civil rights. Okay, what women's right issue is going to be hotly debated in 1960s?
Abortion?
No, we already have suffrage.
Oh.
Abortion. Okay? Roe versus Wade, that court hearing is going to be passed in 72. It gets to the Supreme Court through the 1960s with a huge motion for women and male support through the 60s in order to get that. Fun fact today, our state legislator has voted down Roe versus Wade. To a degree, they're challenging it directly to hope that it goes to the Supreme Court in DC.
Today?
This morning at like 1 in the morning. So what they've done is that they say there's no abortions allowed in Florida up until the 16-week mark, which is the only legal ones, in order to help push it to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court, and hopefully they're hoping 2023, 2024, can argue Roe versus Wade, whether it is a legitimate law or not a legitimate law, even though it's been passed by the Supreme Court once. So this is like a huge thing that's going on around the whole nation right now. It's not just Florida. It's not just Florida. But a lot of states around the country are challenging Roe versus Wade because for the first time in a long time, the Supreme Court is stacked Republican, not Democrat. So they're trying to take this opportunity to try to push it to the Supreme Court. Whatever side you're on, it's a big issue. And whatever team you're on, if you're a Republican, Democrat, anti-pro, it's a big thing that you should be aware that is happening, that is gaining ground all around. Funny thing is, in women's rights, the abortion, Roe versus Wade, is a huge component of that movement, which is starting and it has a huge burst of push in 1968. Now, Vietnam protests are also going to be huge. You've all seen them burning the draft cards, yes? Hello? With the women's rights, you've seen like women burning their bras and stuff, yeah? That's 68. No? Come on, guys, look at the old stuff. Pretty cool. Okay? And of course, college campuses are the center of it all, and the perfect example is Kent State. It's in Ohio, where 4 kids are going to be killed by the National Guard. Yeah, things went awry. I think we can agree, yes? Okay, but it's a perfect example of how college campuses have been the common center. And even today in 2022, you're starting to see a lot more crackdown on what's happening and what is being said on college campuses today. And this is a huge reaction to the things that have come. All right. Moving on to something even more relevant to our lives, terrorism.
Is this still like in 1968?
No, we're beyond 68. Okay. It is important for you to know, as an American, that the terrorists on 9/11 just didn't get on a plane and say, you know what, I'm going to crash into the World Trade Center for no reason. You know that, right? Okay. Do we know why they picked the World Trade Center? Joseph?
Maybe it's like important, like trait.
Economic.
You're not wrong. It was also one of the tallest buildings in New York. It's not the tallest building. It wasn't the tallest, but it's one of the tallest. So it's a symbol of American power. But it's called the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Center homes the World Trade Organization, which is used in order to put sanctions on countries in order to punish and support other countries. And who do you think controls it? America, which is why it was helmed in New York. Now, the World Trade Organization is going to put a ton of sanctions on Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan, which we're going to find out why here in a few minutes. We're going to start at the beginning. But it's the frustration with these sanctions that are going to deplete the economic resources of these countries that they believe, not Samantha Bennett, do not go home and say Samantha Bennett believes. That is why they believe they were justified in bombing us on 9/11 at the World Trade Center because we have suppressed their economy and have destroyed their ability to make a living. Why do they feel that way? Well, before we even had these terrorist group come up with this plan under Osama bin Laden, what we're going to see is the evolution of this movement. After the Cold War, we can all agree blowing up a country off the map is not a good look. Can we agree? Mutual self-destruction is something everyone fears. Okay? So much so that here in the United States we start doing spy work. Yes? Covert operations. Yes? Even us, the most powerful nation in the world, starts doing this. Well, these small nations, they know they can't just blow up a military base because we'd level their whole country. So instead of them directly going after us militarily, they're going after the people. Because if you can affect the minds of a population, you can have a much more devastating impact with a smaller fuse. Think about it. 9/11 changed the world, especially for Americans. When you go on an airplane, don't you think a little bit twice? Doesn't it give you a little bit more anxiety? Yes. Terrorism. When you stop thinking about your normal plans and adjust to the will of other people, you've allowed other people to threaten your daily lives. Terrorism. Now, us as high school student and teacher in America, okay, we do live with a terrorist threat every day. Domestic terrorism, yes? Okay? If you hear a couple loud pops outside, what are we all immediately thinking and jumping to our feet? That there's a shooting, correct? That's domestic terrorism. We've done this to ourselves. But that idea of us one person going against a huge thing and changing people's lives psychologically, that's what terrorism is about. After the Cold War, everyone recognizes that you can't just match one military to another. We have countries that don't have the military power of other countries. So instead of just sitting there and taking the blows, they're going to use a mental war. And that's terrorism. Very effective, don't you think? No? Okay. Okay. So, what is going to happen? Terrorism is typically used by non-government groups. What is a non-government group? Don't tell me it's a terrorist group. You can't use terrorist group in the definition of terrorism. Oh, God. What do you got, Hayden?
It's like a group that doesn't have like a big following that's like separate from the government.
Yeah, okay. It's like your own subculture in a country. Every single country has subcultures, yes? Here in the United States, there's a lot of them, okay? We are not homogeneous, which means everyone kind of collectively does the same and thinks the same. We have lots of small factions. Some of them are good, some of them are not, okay? When we're talking about non-government groups, we're starting to see, and this makes it important, religious extremists. And that's where a lot of our terrorist groups are going to come from, especially in the Midwest. Are you okay over there, Olivia?
Yeah.
Okay, I just saw you highlighting your whole screen. Just wanted to check on you. Okay, so it is important for you to hear this. Terrorists are not just Arabs. Here in America, we've had a lot of terrorist attacks abroad, and of course 9/11, that have been done by Arabs. But that is not the only type of terrorism that exists. We have domestic terrorism here in the United States, and what demographics doing that? White men. Yeah, white men. Okay? Well, it's true, absolutely. They are the biggest concern of the FBI right now, is white domestic terrorism is the biggest problem the FBI is facing in 2022. Okay? Arab terrorism is one. We have white-on-white terrorism that's happening in Ireland. So terrorism is not just Arab. So if that is your continuation, if that's your thought process, you are wrong. All right, let's do some boards before we end. On your whiteboard, please tell me, what is the first country to push Russia away slightly? Slightly. They can't push them too hard because they're the most important one. What do we got, Scott? On your whiteboard, what country pushes Russia completely away, but, they still had an army inside them and they got reconquered like in 2 seconds. So not the best look. What do we got? Andrew? Hungry. Goodbye.
This is actually
Oh my God, did you hear it? Cassidy said it was interesting.
I just know about it. I'm learning about this stuff. Cassidy, you're lying. It's not as bad as
It's only
others.
because I know.
It's not as bad as